In this exploration, I want to follow different threads in the pattern of health, healing, wholeness, and integration, and disintegration, disease, and an increasing amount of pain. Threads of this video include looking at the recreation of an intergenerational abuse pattern and its disintegration into a healthier pattern. I want to start with the idea that in the larger fabric of being, in the larger fabric of creation of all that is, that there is an innate desire to integrate, to become whole, to become conscious, and to move towards a co-creating, a partnering between the individual ego and the larger sense or the larger fabric of self. In that sense, the ego is a zoom-in lens or flashlight that defines itself by what it is conscious of. And in doing so, directs the flashlight on different parts of the pattern of the larger self. And as it moves into certain levels of pain and traumatic pain, becomes fixated in its aversion to certain states of being that are overwhelmingly painful. We've got a couple of different distinctions that I'll go through with you. One is the brain hierarchy, which correlates with the consciousness hierarchy. As human beings, we have the reptilian brainstem, the fight, flight, freeze survival mechanism out of fear that any human being can be reduced to simply by the phenomena of repeated external trauma that goes unrepaired, communicating to the ego consciousness that we are in a sociopathic environment in which fight, flight, freeze is the best odds of survival. A sociopathic environment is natural when there is unregulated energy creating pain, which then leads to the fear of pain. All fear is founded on the expectation of pain repeating itself in the future. And the best basis of that prediction is repeated overwhelming pain in the present or past that is not being resolved. So there's an expectation of that pain continuing or emerging again in the future, creating fear. Fear of what? Fear of that level of pain. When there is not the technology within the ego, which is a microcosm of the cultural environment, when there is not the technology in the culture and thus downstepped into the ego to anticipate a relief of pain, the ego then moves into traumatic coping. And the first step is to deny it. If one cannot face one's fear, if one cannot digest and face one's pain, one moves into denial, into distraction, into addiction, and into suppression, as well as dissociation from that pain. Next, the pain moves into unconsciousness. And finally, the pain in its unconscious state moves into reenactment. And the challenge of the individual ego identity is to reestablish a healthy and healing relationship with the larger ecology of which it is a part. And in order to do so, it must be conscious of its relationship. The individual must be conscious of its relationship with the larger self, with the larger ecology in terms of natural ecology, with the larger ecology in terms of the species, with the larger ecology in terms of the invisible or the non-physical consciousness out of which we emerge. The multiverse, all that is essentially beautiful, good, symmetrical, balanced, whole. The ego in the framework of free will is not necessarily beautiful, true, good, whole, as we define that. And this comes from this freedom to shine the light of self-awareness, the ego's flashlight, on different parts of the whole in a symmetrical or an asymmetrical pattern. When we shine the light of consciousness symmetrically and freely, without fear, into the full spectrum of who we are and the full spectrum of what is, we have a healthy and a free and a healing relationship with the whole. When, through the influence of culture, we fixate the ego in certain terrains of all that is, in certain terrains of ourself, and internalize the fear of other terrains of who we are and other terrains of all that is, we develop a diseased relationship with the larger self based on suppression, based on fear. And the culture, which is around the individual ego, thus creating, in a sense, the ego as a microcosm of the culture, is diseased, is asymmetrical, is not whole. Now, every human ego in human history has the same core hierarchy of human needs as outlined by Abraham Maslow. The need for survival, the need for security in that survival, the need for a sense of love and belonging. And next comes self-esteem. But if we look at love and belonging in an environment that is largely manufactured by culture, in order to secure love and belonging, we must bend and be shaped by the fears, by the blind spots, by the pain, by the dissociation of the surrounding culture because of the phenomena of mass. As an infant, as we emerge into the reality, we start to understand that these feelings at these intensities terrify our parents, and our parents go from pain to fear of pain, to denial, to dissociation, to suppression of us as the infant. Meaning the internalized culture in the parent creates a relationship between the full probability of the child, which is symmetrical. Children are born with an enormous probability field to to learn any number of different languages, any number of different cultures, as infants have done throughout recorded history. If an infant is born in Japan, they talk Japanese, they think Japanese, they eat Japanese, and that pattern is largely set as the infant comes to know their self in the framework of their culture. As the symmetrical sense of self intersects with the overwhelming mass of cult or culture, the self, the ego, starts to observe patterns in the body language and in the communication of parents that let them know that in order to survive, in order to be secure in that survival, in order to feel a sense of love and belonging and have a sense of internalized validation in the terms of self-esteem, that the ego must start mirroring the disease of the parent, must start mirroring respect, an awareness and a response to the pains and the fears of pains held by the grown-ups around them. And so the pain, the fear of pain, the denial, the dissociation and suppression initially takes the infant into pain, because an infant needs love and belonging. That is a human need. Now, if one part of the psyche, if one part of the infant causes pain, fear of pain, denial, dissociation, suppression, and quite often violence or trauma in its expression, that part of the self does not feel secure in its survival. It feels certain of its trauma. It doesn't feel a sense of love and belonging. It senses the hatred that is connected with overwhelming fear, that is connected with the parent's fear of pain. We can see this in the sexuality of, for example, males in Western culture, whereas the natural bisensuality of a human being as a child grows up is met with fear, is met with pain, is met with criticism, with hard, overwhelming energy directed by the cult, by the parent, towards the child, towards that part of the child's psyche. The child has, in a sense, a choice, in a sense, a mandate to disown, to out of the pain inflicted by the cult, out of the fear of that overwhelming and traumatic pain, to move into denial of oneself in order to reduce the pain and the fear of pain of the grown-ups around, and return to the sanctioned location in the cult and in the psyche of love and belonging as conforming to the male stereotype that is imposed, that is sculpted by the culture. Now, every cult, every culture, by definition, is asymmetrical and is largely coming from the past. If we look, for example, at the validation that Western culture gives to cerebral intelligence, skin color, maleness, and size, meaning someone who is articulate and who has a large and well-proportioned body in a Western culture and is male, is traditionally given an unconscious validation out of a time when larger bodies in the framework of war and survival meant something, coming from the past, meaning larger male bodies have a survival edge 1,000 years ago or in warfare, etc., more so than today. Often who was considered right. You know, if two men went into a duel, into a sword fight, the larger male statistically won that fight, or a wrestling or a fist fight. And so size elevated. Smallness then becomes something that is more likely to lead to pain, which then leads to the fear of pain, the fear of smallness, and the anticipated pain from being small. Gentleness, similarly, has often led to pain in a sociopathic environment, leading to fear of pain, leading to fear of gentleness. And so this, come on, you got to be tough, you got to toughen up. You've got to disown the sensitivity. Becomes a cultural message out of historical statistics rather than the present day, in which, frankly, if you are smaller and more cooperative and more intelligent, you have a much better odds of being happy and bringing happiness to your family circle than if you are large and sociopathic. Your survival odds may go up in certain categories, but your actual well-being goes down in an environment in which global cooperation is the ultimate power, is the ultimate freedom in our culture today. Cultures, by definition, rely on past codes, things that have helped that culture survive in conflict with another culture. And yet this breaks the psyche in half. This causes a wound to the symmetrical probability field of the human ego. And that wound is tended at the sophistication of our culture by focusing the language and the consciousness on culturally sanctioned narratives and on culturally sanctioned areas of the psyche that through repetition become an identity. That I am the one that I talk about. I am the one that does this and doesn't do this. And that becomes me as a microcosm of the culture in which I was born. Now, in the culture of chauvinism, in the culture of sociopathic tension, the winner in violence, in violent conflict, is considered the victor, and the victor is considered superior, almost deified, as deities or gods or goddesses are the projected embodiment, the projected archetype of that which is most correlated with the human needs, the hierarchy of human needs: survival, security, love and belonging, a sense of self-esteem. Then certainly those characteristics that allow one person to survive become deified, including dominance and strength, including the winner of a war, and those traits associated with winning a war. not thinking too much, not repairing the past, moving forward in environments of scarcity are also elevated. Those memes of moving on are elevated when survival is at stake. And to this day, in our cult, we talk about the dog-eat-dog world. We have this sense of scarcity, that there's not enough to go around, and that to get ahead at often whatever cost, to get ahead in money, in sex, in social ranking and power, is almost synonymous with deification. That if you win, even by unsavory means, and don't get caught, that the culture, particularly the American culture, elevates one. There's a certain admiration. They got away with it. They won. And we don't necessarily want to look too closely at the code of how that was brought about. Now, we exist in terms of the larger psyche of the species, the larger probability field of the species. And the highest probability field of the species is released in a culture and in a state of transcendence, meaning when we understand that we are a part of the earth and the earth is a part of us, when we understand that we are a part of one another and that the species is a part of us, when we understand that we are a part of all that is, and that all that is fractally contained within each unit of all that is, then the reptilian brain, which is the brain stem, the lizard state from which we emerge, is the smallest part of our probability field. Within the reptilian brain stem, we can survive and we can cope as a species, killing one another, seeing who wins, etc., etc., and to some extent there is survival. There is not a lot of security within the program of the reptilian brain, because when you traumatize and kill other people, they have the same reptilian brainstem of fight, flight, and freeze to come back at us, and so you have an endless dominance struggle in a sense of seeking survival. Security tends to come as we move up through the limbic emotional raw feeling and into more of an ability to think and to reason. Then we have the reptilian impulses to fight, to run, to freeze. But we also have this overlay of analytical thinking that says that even though there's some part of me that wants to kill you or steal from you or rape or do this, it's not actually in everyone's interest, and so it's not really in my interest in the long term. We have this governor of being able to understand, yes, I don't want to wait in traffic, but the thing is, if we all agree to drive on the right side of the road, then we don't have to worry about crashing into one another. Because if everyone just drives wherever they want, in every different direction, every which way, you don't actually have more freedom, you have less freedom. You have a collapse of flow because you have a collapse of cooperation. And why would you drive even on the wrong side of the road if anyone might pull out at any moment and hit you, and everyone's just doing their own thing? And so there's a sublimation of the reptilian brainstem through cooperative reason. We may not like the Chinese, but if we ship this over here and they buy our debt and this do this, well then it's better for us and it's better for the Chinese, and that's okay. And so there's a rationalized one expression of that is free market capitalism. The idea that it's better overall if we cooperate in a free market system. And certainly within that framework, life expectancy has raised, quality of living in various metrics has raised, quality of life, etc., goes up. I can buy more things for lower prices because we all cooperate and agree, even though we don't necessarily like one another or identify with the other person. It's kind of a rational-based cooperation. Now, as we develop as human beings towards a sense of the future, towards a sense of vision, towards a sense of realizing our potential, this takes us into the region of the brain that actually understands deeply that to reach our full potential as an individual, our greatest potential for well-being and the contributing to well-being, we actually need to function as one. We need to cooperate as if we were part of a larger body, because that's where the logic leads to. You see, the logic, if you really pay attention to it, says, okay, they've got swine flu over in China. Who cares, right? They're not part of my tribe. Who cares? There's no empathy. And of course, that short-sighted thinking leads to things like air flight being grounded, where now we can't travel to whole regions of the world for times because the nature of reality is integrated. Meaning everything is a viral pattern. Thoughts are a viral pattern, memes are a viral pattern, feelings are a viral pattern, diseases, bacteria, they're all viral patterns. And so, in the same way that in the United States, the majority did not care about AIDS because that was that group's over there. But like all viruses, it of course, when you don't respond to a disease in a minority, the pain doesn't stay indefinitely in the minority. If you treat a whole race as subhuman, eventually they riot. And what do they riot? They riot your things that you said were more important than them. And the HIV doesn't just stay in the minority designated by the cult as being subhuman, not as important. And so, of course, it spills out into, quote, the important people. And so we have this dynamic right now of sociopathic fight, flight, freeze, limbic, tribalism, rational awareness of free market mingled with self-centeredness in the sense of as long as it happens to those other people, I don't really care. It's my family that matters. And then we have these continual messages coming back from the ecosystem saying that that doesn't work very well. And of course it doesn't. It works better than pure fight, flight, freeze, but it doesn't work very well because the Ebola that starts over here where nobody cares about the sanitation of human beings over there suddenly makes its way over to here where we do care about sanitation. but the virus has already mutated and taken hold, and now we're spending billions, if not trillions of dollars in a true epidemic to contain it. And these are the reminders, the gentle reminders from our environment, the environment that we are a part of. Because part of the phenomena of the human ego is to create this illusionary partition between one cell in the body of self and the rest of the body. I'm me and I'm not you. I'm me and I'm not the planet. I'm me because I shine this flashlight in a very specialized pattern that illuminates the distinct parts of me, but that hides and masks the integrated parts, the fabric of indefinite integrated connection with all that is. Many of us have never it's never occurred to us, given the tribal nature of our cult, to understand that we are intimately connected with a grain of sand on the other side of the universe. And one of the things that connects us is gravity. Gravity is a constant, as a formula. It applies evenly across the entire universe. And so a bit of sand on the other side of the universe exists with us, connected by the constant of gravity, which means that if someone on the other side of the universe gets into the code and shifts gravity, it doesn't just shift it for their reality. Gravity throughout the entire universe shifts at the same time. The formula in the constant changes. And suddenly our houses are floating off the ground. Or suddenly it's too heavy to walk. There is a connection that is a very deep-seated connection, but a very invisible connection in our culture between what happens over there and what happens here. And there are many, many, many such connections. I may say, this is my body. But if it's really your body, it should be able to exist in complete independence of everything else. But as soon as you stop the connection with the larger ecology, it's called breathing, suddenly you learn it's not your body at all. It's on loan. It's on loan. And who's loaning it to you? The trees that are producing oxygen. They have gifted you a body for another day. No more trees, no more humans. It's that simple. It's not really quite so independent. But of course we don't look at it. We don't thank the trees for our oxygen. We don't thank the streams for our water. You see, because the water could just pick up and leave town. Say, okay, you're your own body, you don't care about water, you don't care about the environment, that's fine. We'll take the water over to Pluto, and you can have your independent reality, disregarding the environment, and see how long you get without any liquid. See how much you can eat when there's no water for the crops. See, these crises impose upon the culturally limited focal system of the flashlight that's shining in a way that meets the reward pattern provided by the culture. So the planet is giving us messages that say we're connected. But the cult is giving louder messages saying, don't pay any attention to that. Do what we tell you to do, and we will give you more survival, more security, more sense of love and belonging. But what good is being ecologically aware if no one will give you a job, if no one will give you a license to do your business, etc.? And so the cult influence is a very profound and primary influence. as a child is born into a culture that it experiences more directly than the healthy. You see, because what's healthy is easy. And what's healthy and easy, it's easy to be invisible. The trees have never let us down yet. They've never gone on strike. The streams have always provided enough water. But the parents, on the other hand, if you don't do what they say, if you don't get an A in some subject that you're never going to use for the rest of the life, suddenly they're glaring at you, they're hitting you, they're shouting at you, they're shaming you, and you realize that nature is sane. You can count on the trees to give you oxygen, to give you water, etc. But you cannot count on people to be sane, to be consistent. And so the pivot from the ego perspective in its bid to survive is towards mimicking the memes of a diseased culture, a culture that in the United States consumes more energy per person than any culture in human history, and simultaneously produces high degrees of suicide, high degrees of mental emotional disease, high degrees of sexual abuse, high degrees of shame, high degrees of panic around social survival, which has become synonymous in our culture with survival, because we have developed such a dependence on the cooperation of other people that if we step outside the cult boundaries into taboo, our survival is in jeopardy, whether it's the millions of Americans that are put in jail for smoking a little marijuana or any number of, it doesn't matter if it's rational. Your survival has got to be paying attention to what these people are going to reward, and these people are going to traumatize you for doing or not doing. And one of the things that's common in our culture is to ask the infant to protect the culture, the country, and the parents. Growing up in a dysfunctional household that looked decent on the outside, that was conforming to cultural values of money, physical attractiveness, mental acuity, but not conforming so much in terms of human decency and kindness and healing. The child gets the message constantly, your parents are good, you're bad. And where you deviate from the chosen path, you're a bad person. You're not lovable. You may not survive. You certainly won't feel secure and have love and belonging in this culture if you break these laws. And one of the deepest seated laws is the law of suppression and hiding shame. In various cultures around the world where there's taboos, very few grown-ups are perfect. And so the measure of survival and social acceptance, etc., is not whether someone is perfect, it's in many ways how good they are at hiding the imperfections, at hiding the taboos. In the 18th century, a woman is pregnant, and there is no looking for the man. There's no shame directed at the man. Rather, the pregnant girl is sent off to another state to be hidden so as not to ruin the family's reputation. And those who had the ability to buy that off and maintain the good looks rose in status. And those that were caught in some taboo, however absurd, were shamed, met the ire of their cult, were excommunicated, were burned at the stake, were tormented, were imprisoned, didn't get the good jobs, weren't able to be in the power system. Now, the underlying fabric of all that is graceful, is symmetrical, is healthy, is whole, is complex, and is a culture, is a cultural. Meaning there has never been a culture that fully embodied, embraced the full grace of a symmetrical and complex relationship with all that is, of partnering. In a traumatic history, the unknown becomes terrifying because surprise has always emerged out of the unknown. And some of the surprises within the unknown, in the way that we prepare and anticipate and relate to them, are traumatizing. So every culture, to some extent, is a bastion of a status quo or dogma that is in defense from and a protection against the fear of the unknown, of a people that does not have the sophistication in their paradigms and technology to partner with the natural flows of energy in our ecology and amongst people that can maximize well-being. If we look at the probability field of the planet and of the species, it's a very small probability field in fight and flight. It grows 5, 6 times, 10 times bigger with reason. But the biggest explosion of our potential comes with the empathy, with the self-love, and the transcendent love for both the planet and the species, which naturally leads to a sophistication of education that we do not possess. We can look at the wounding in the American psyche of a culture that will put its child through kindergarten, preschool, middle school, high school, and college without spending a single hour on emotional literacy, without spending a single hour discussing childhood trauma and abuse that is rampant, without spending a single day teaching the science of intelligent win-win relationships. We can go through our entire lives never studying the arts that are most significant for a life of partnering and a life of more grace, of many, many times more efficiency, more grace in the transmutation of energy into sustainable well-being. The psyche and all that is are fractal patterns at different scales. We are a very small fractal pattern of the larger self, of the larger species, of the larger probability field. And it is our nature to realize that potential as human egos. It is our nature to retain a sense of self while being simultaneously aware of the far greater reality of which we are a part, and which in the acknowledging of that connection releases the paradigm that when we go to war, we are always going to war with ourselves. We are always battling the larger self of which we are a part. And in the same way that a finger that goes through a period of evolution of attacking the brain, perhaps. No, I don't want to do that. I want to do this over here, and no one's going to tell me what to do, and I'm my own finger, and blah, blah, blah. Well, if the finger does succeed in killing the larger body, it kills itself. If the rampant, paranoid, and dissociative ego consciousness ends up killing the planet because no one's going to tell me what to do, we kill ourselves. When cancer, unwilling to be regulated and integrated into the larger growth of the self, just grows uncontrollably on its own, it has an explosive growth cycle, but it kills its host. And as soon as the host body dies, the cancer is soon to follow. I want to talk a little bit about the human ego's relationship with pain, with abuse, and why reality will continually present us with the anomalous data of fuzzy math until we reconcile ourselves with the larger books of the universe. In bookkeeping, you reconcile your accounts so that you have an integrated relationship, a relationship with integrity with the rest of the money system. Because if you think you have $100,000 in the bank because you refuse to count your debits, and so really you're $20,000 in debt, but you don't realize it because you're selectively counting half of the ledger, it's bad news. It's bad news for you, it's bad news for your company, it's bad news for everyone doing business with you. Because you're insolvent. You're not sustainable. And so, while the attempt to scam, the attempt to pull one over, the attempt to hide the debits of a particular practice, of a particular protocol, are all over the place. Eventually, they just hide from ourselves and our culture the very patterns that are causing unnecessary suffering, unnecessary disease. And so in the same way that an honest bookkeeper brings a vitality to a business by giving real feedback. If you have real feedback, gee, we're not making money. Now we're going into debt. Now we're going into more debt. The point of this data is to bring us back into symmetry. In the financial system, that is coming up with a more valuable service, or learning the art of collecting or charging more money, etc., so that a good service continues in business. In the sense of a disease, if you're being ravaged by a disease that you're in denial about, it will consume your whole body and then you're dead. So the denial pattern, perhaps handed by a culture, afraid of facing a pain it didn't know how to deal with. A denial pattern enables the disease to continue when everyone turns away from the bully, who is perhaps, along with 3 other bullies, single-handedly reducing the safety, the well-being, the creativity in the school system by 40%. We turn our backs on everyone in that school, including the bullies, because we're not diagnosing the disease. We're not diagnosing the fact that every bully has a partitioned area of their psyche that feels powerless and is so committed to avoiding that pain that it is continually enacting it and directing that pain to other people. In a certain sense, bringing it to the attention of the community to say, look at me. I am an anomalous equation in your midst, created by an anomalous and an asymmetrical culture. The culture needs to be developed. The culture needs to be healed. and I'm a presenting symptom. If you turn your back on me, you turn your back on everyone, you turn your back on the culture, and it falls to the next generation to pick up where the last generation left off. Now, pain is a symptom of disease. Pain is a symptom of disease. Unnecessary pain that people spend energy to generate. For example, when a child brings up a topic of conversation and says, "Hey, why is mom crying?" and the child gets a slap on the face, because it's not okay to bring consciousness to mama's tears. In that moment, the entire system that is leading to the abuse, that's leading to the tears, is suppressed. And so it does not get medicine. It doesn't get consciousness and the opportunity to reinvent and evolve the system. And so the system, the disease, continues to manufacture symptoms until it gets dealt with. So we have pain, and at that point in the cycle, we either look to the larger environment and our relationship to it, and we make a change, or the pain grows. As the pain grows, we either look to it again, or we go into fear of pain. If pain continues to grow, and nobody likes feeling pain, and we don't change the pain, there is every reason to believe and anticipate that the pain will be there in the future. And so we develop a fear of pain. When we are afraid of pain, and we do not respond to the pain or the fear of the pain, the fear builds. And often out of that fear, out of a counterphobic reaction to that fear, we will actually lash out and create pain. We will retreat into the reptilian brainstem of fight, flight, and freeze, terrified of pain, lashing out at our environment and creating more pain. If we understand that and it overwhelms us, pain's getting worse, I'm getting more scared, I don't know what to do, I'm overwhelmed, because I'm in a culture that if I bring up this pain, I will be shamed, I will be marginalized, my survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem will be reduced, because I'm in a shadow adverse culture. I'm in a shadow suppression culture. I'm in a pain suppression culture. Then, if we bring up the pain, we're attacked by the culture. If we don't bring up the pain grows. And with the pain growing, coping mechanisms to manage, divert, anesthetize, we go numb, for example. It's part of unconsciousness. As the pain descends into denial, dissociation, suppression, and unconsciousness, once it's unconscious, there is a relief. We are no longer afraid. We're no longer conscious of our fear. We're no longer conscious of the pain. We're in an oblivious state. We've regressed. But we're still doing the very thing that created the pain in the first place. So the pain will reemerge. The pain will reemerge and resurface as a reenactment of the abuse. Abuse, be it abuse of the self, be it abuse of the environment, be it abuse of one another, abuse is a reenactment of an asymmetrical, damaging, unbalanced, pain-producing behavior that ripples out like a virus. And if other people are more afraid of the unknown than they are of sitting down and deciding on how to change, this will be tolerated by others who are anesthetizing themselves to this wave of chronic pain. Every interaction that we have in Western culture contains elements of violation, elements of pain, elements of forced asymmetry that produces dis-ease, that takes more energy than a more wholesome and a more balanced pattern. And yet the cult is afraid of the unknown, more so than it is afraid of what is a chronic low level or manageable level of pain that has been established dogmatically as normal. Now this process of abuse, of instilling and mandating in a child, in an individual, the dissociation from parts of self, the dissociation of awareness of large parts of who we are, including our environment, is painful for the child. They feel the pain, they try and address the pain, but they're met with more pain. They're met with pushback. I do it because I said so. I'm your parent. This is how we do things in this culture. Don't talk to me about school. Go to school. Get an A. Do this. Get it. I don't care. Get a job. And get this kind of a job. I don't care about this. These violations that are unconscious because they've been suppressed and denied in the parent become the violations of the child. Now, as the child pushes back and is met with more violation and overwhelming scale, the child learns that the inner protectorate feels safer protecting the self from its own truth than protecting the integrity of the self at odds with the cult. And this creates enormous grief, insanity, and dissociation, because now the psyche is at war with itself. Every human being living in Western culture is at war with itself. And to some extent, every culture in recorded history is at war with itself. Because all that is spherical. It is an infinite number of lines forming that sphere. And the crudeness of human consciousness, particularly when it is regularly regressed to the reptilian brainstem, does not have the creativity and sophistication of consciousness and language to be able to speak and thus be aware of all of itself and thus be conscious of the violations to large parts of the self in the adherence to cultural protocols on a daily basis. If you are in the United States and express grief to another man, you have a 90+% probability that that grief will be unacknowledged. You have a very low percentage, maybe 2%, maybe 5%, that you'll get the warmth and the intelligent question, I'm so sorry, how can I help? And a real interest in doing it rather than the resentment of being pulled out of the ego's sphere of false isolation into something that doesn't fit the culturally defined definition of success, that defines people who speak about pain as losers, as yet another way to ensure that pain is not dealt with. The pain of social shame, of exclusion, of judgment and separation is such that many will turn and fight the feelings in themselves, suppressing, drinking, addicting, denying, passing those suppressed feelings on to other people with violence and violation to transfer them, to spread the meme of violation, rather than to heal the essential cultural patterns that are at the root of those violations. One of the crises for a human ego in our culture is that without any training in grief, without any modeling of traumatic repair, without any healthy definition or awareness of self and the imposition of guilt, fear, and shame from religion, from the chauvinism of the culture, from the pattern of behavior that is consistently enforced around, is a child can find themselves in so much grief and so much pain without any technology or modeling on how to deal with it, that they become terrified of the part of themselves that has been so violated and is in such pain. And one of the interesting expressions of this is that the child who has been victimized, who has been violated to a certain extent of pain, will actually dissociate from their own identity and identify with their abuser. If daddy's beating the shit out of them, and there's no way they can get out of it or anticipate any relief because everyone is colluding in the secret, the pain becomes unbearable, and identifying with the victim within the self that is being violated becomes too painful, and the child goes through a fear of pain, denial, dissociation, suppression, and unconsciousness of the part of them that has been hurt, while simultaneously transferring their identity to the abuser, to dad, to the one who beat me, with an aspiration to become that, to become the violator, while disowning the abused and wounded and confused victim. And here we have the process of becoming a bully, where every time those terrified small feelings erupt within the psyche and start to pierce the attention arena of someone in that kind of pain, they identify with the violator and find someone who embodies those parts of themselves that they've dissociated from and beat the shit out of them until that person expresses the pain that the bully has dissociated from. And in doing so, distracts the bully and allows the bully to project their internal pain onto their victim. In other words, every bully is holding an amount of grief, pain, and trauma that they lack the skill and technology and safety to deal with. So as the grief presents itself, remember, the psyche wants to heal. The psyche wants to be whole. It is our nature to move back towards grace, which means it is our nature to bring to consciousness that pattern of behavior, that pattern of thinking, believing, feeling, and doing, that pattern of speaking that is producing a chronic level of pain. And we cannot heal, we cannot disintegrate the pain pattern and reintegrate a healthy pattern without consciousness. Because it was done, the abuse, the violation was done with consciousness. Other human beings decided to beat the shit out of you. And we decided how to deal with that. Or we didn't because we were 2 years old. That has got to come to consciousness and be assessed as to how it can fit together in a healthier way, or it will repeat itself in an unconscious virus that ripples through us as we model either victimhood or aggressor in polarities that are not natural, in wars that are not real, that are not intelligent, but are believed in, and that produce so much pain that in a culture that doesn't understand pain or how to address it, we are afraid of the pain rather than appreciative. It's as if we grow up in a cult that starts fires, but doesn't teach us how to put out the fires. And so eventually we knock the smoke detectors down. Because if we can't put the fires out anyway, the last thing we need is the screeching noise blaring away. Get out of here, that's scaring me. Nothing I can do about these fires. But of course, in a culture that knows how to respond to pain, the ding, 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 pain is here, a pattern of energy, a pattern of violation is here. We need to see what it is because we have the intelligence and the character to change it. And as an interconnected species, as an interconnected ecology, we cannot change many of the painful patterns alone. It means working together. And the big tension on the planet today is between the small minority of people that are moving into transcendent consciousness and that understand the need to work together and that understand that healing pain is not only possible, it is our nature and it is our destiny. That it is the inevitable consequence of evolution. That it is inevitable. That any evolving consciousness evolves to a point of collaboratively healing pain. In part, by healing the wound of illusionary separation that pretends I've got nothing to be grateful for from the trees, I've got nothing to be grateful for from the stream, I've got nothing to appreciate about the earth and its creatures, about the food, and that those people have nothing to do with me, and that my past and my future has nothing to do with me, and that we have no thing to do with the rest of the universe, that we're all alone as isolated individuals, starving and drowning in a loneliness that is the byproduct of activating repeatedly the reptilian brainstem by creating and sustaining a sociopathic environment that reduces you to the reptilian brainstem as you're homeless, and you here as you can't pay your medical bills, and you here that you don't have a friend to talk to, and everyone says it's not my job. It's not my job to respond to that. Because I'm all alone and you are too. The pain that comes from that is an illusion in the sense that without the cultural battering on a regular basis, reinforced on all levels, and even the projection of a deity that will burn you alive if you don't do what you're told, a mirror of so much of our parenting, that's an illusion that is brought into reality out of acting out of that level of consciousness. And the illusion evaporates as soon as we believe in and partner in a higher level of consciousness. We have a minority of people that are believing in that, and we have a majority of people who are knocking that minority regularly back into reptilian brainstem, punishing that vision, punishing that transcendence, because it represents the unknown. in a culture that is terrified of the unknown, because the unknown represents a probability of trauma at the level of sophistication we have as a culture, as a consciousness, as we enter the unknown. We enter at war with something we don't understand, and trauma will continue. In the same way that a cell of the body going to war with the rest of the body is destined to lose that battle, but if it's lucky, may discover its interconnection with everything that it loses. In other words, may discover before it kills itself or too much of its environment, it may discover that it's not a battle, that all that is feeds the particle, and the particle adds to the diversity of all that is in an interconnected ecology. It's very difficult for human egos that have been acculturated to this system, which is a system that separates us as individuals from the entirety of all that is, in which most of us do not have transcendent experiences beyond our humanity. It is very difficult, having been shut off from nature, shut off from each other, shut off from most of the universe and from all non-physical consciousness, to then risk the ire of those similarly blinded, who seem like the last bastions in our hope for survival, security, love, and belonging. As we are then faced with the choice to honor parts of who we are and reconnect with ourselves and face the overwhelming grief, the overwhelming pain of that which we have neglected as we towed the cultural line to disown those parts of ourselves for decades. It's very difficult to turn away from the breadcrumbs of belonging provided by our cult to go back to the oases of wholeness when there's so much pain that we are so frightened of on the surface. But this is our journey. And what I want to suggest is that that pain is too big for the human ego as it has been culturally defined to deal with alone. That we need support and help to turn back towards our wholeness. But as we do turn back to our wholeness, our sense of love and belonging, and with it survival and security, are replenished. We can become leaders in a blind and deaf and terrified culture. It is a delicate process, and it is this that is our stage in our species evolution. The stage from the rational brain governed largely by fear to the transcendent brain that uses love through reason and rationality as a tool to release the potential of our species. Sexuality is one of the primary currents of life that runs through us. It crosses the masculine and feminine divide, meaning all sexes flow between polarity. One of the tools that we can use as a sick ego, in a sick relationship with ourselves, to diagnose our disease, is the awareness of sexual fantasy. Sexual fantasy can reveal the conflicts within our own masculine and feminine self, be us a man or a woman. We each have a masculine and feminine self, a part that gives, a part that receives, a part that speaks, a part that listens, a part that asserts, a part that is receptive, a part that says how about it, and a part that says yes. These polarities that are part of every facet of life exist within each one of us. Part of chauvinism is to divide the Western psyche between the masculine within every man and woman and the feminine within every man and woman. In the mistaken and mislabeled paradigm that says that masculine energy is more valuable than feminine energy, and thus masculine energy is higher ranking in cult terminology than feminine energy. So that the machismo of a man is more valuable than their gentleness, that the thinking rationality is more valuable than the spontaneity of feeling and intuition. Our greatest scientists, including Einstein, bring their masculine and feminine together, getting phenomenal insights with a dream. Francis Crick, a materialist scientist who only after his death was willing to let it be known that he discovered DNA on LSD. In other words, he understood that in a chauvinistic, materialistic cult, that even something as phenomenal as the discovery of the geometry of DNA would be discounted if it was understood to come from the gift of a vision, from the wisdom of his own body, under the influence of a psychedelic that made him more intuitive, more feminine, less dogmatic and rational, and that it was the combining of the two, like with Einstein's dreams, that brought our species forward. Thomas Edison, a renowned inventor, took a nap every day and slept on his engineering problems in a silent, noise-proof room in the factory with a notepad as he woke out of consciousness, honoring the role that his semi-conscious and unconscious minds had to play in the gifts that we take advantage as we scoff at our own dreams, riding on a culture provided by scientists willing to embrace their feminine side. In sexual fantasy, we reveal where we primarily identify and what the core energy is as our masculine relates with our feminine. If we find ourselves primarily releasing the energy of flow, of arousal, identifying as a male or a female, violating someone in a feminine position, a child, a woman, we can understand that there is a deep-seated wound within our innocence, within our younger self, within our feminine side, that is too painful to feel, that is too painful to own, and so we've suppressed and denied it. But seeking reintegration with the whole self, we identify with the violator, with the one who violated us, and reenact the abuse within our own psyche in a sexual fantasy that is as real as a physical fantasy, that is as real as life, perhaps more real, because it's honest, because it's coming spontaneously as that pattern comes up for reintegration. It's just less dense. Thoughts are many times less dense energy forms than physical forms. But so much of what is physical was once thought. Every garment, every design, everything in our lives was once a thought. And now it's real, meaning now it's at a density that it's picked up by the five senses. But it was originally at a density that was thought. Thought is a powerful tool with imagination to explore, to become conscious of abuse patterns, of asymmetries, of chauvinism within our psyche. That abuse pattern resolves as we can find the support, the courage to speak about and feel the part of us that was murdered, the part of us that was genocided. You see, the outer is a larger expression of the inner. The more than 100 million human beings that were slaughtered in labor camps and wars in the past 100 years are nothing compared to the genocide within the psyche that every cult asks of its own people's personas as they are born symmetrical and find themselves between a rock and a hard place, cutting off more and more of who they are to fit within the safe but dogmatic boxes of a cult that defines a sickeningly rigid and small sense of identity, with the question, do you want to conform, or do you want to risk esteem, love and belonging, security and survival in order to honor yourself, in order to honor all of us, but in doing so triggering the traumatized fear of the unknown that is latent and active in the daily practice of any cult that is not alive with dynamic change and inviting all of its minorities to grow and blossom and coexist with dignity. A growing culture is incorporating change and that which lies without its bounds. A growing culture is embracing diversity and minority. A dying culture is ossifying its people, demanding a totalitarian acceptance of a status quo. Be that status quo that when someone says, how you doing, you're supposed to say you're fine, not tell people how you're doing, and everyone's supposed to do that, and that's how the cult continues to be completely unconscious as we answer the question 100 times a day. When we break out of that mold and say, well, let's talk about how I'm doing for an hour or so, the cult stutters because it's built on lies. It's built on the grease of conformity rather than the authenticity of individuality. We have the choice as individuals and as a culture and as a species to grow through pain or grow through beauty. When a little girl is molested, and everyone looks the other way because they're afraid of the violence and the rage of the father. They are afraid of their own rage, and so they're afraid of the rage in the abuser. So everyone tells the little girl to forget about it. It's no big deal. Let's look the other way. Let's pretend it's not happening. Suppress the wound. Get over it. Move on. Pretend it never happened. The little girl wakes up in an insane world that doesn't know how to defend itself and is often re-abused. The abuse will continue and continue and continue until she says, I'm tired of this. I've been abused. This is a sick culture. I'm not willing to be silent about it anymore, and I'm going to do something about it. And then we see change. Family secrets that are ignored often come up in the dreams of the children, the nightmares. The children will often unconsciously act out that which the parents are so frightened of and trying to bury in their own family history. Patterns in consciousness must come to consciousness, and a new relationship with those energies must be consciously negotiated and then integrate back into the larger culture before the disease is healed. Everything that is suppressed out of fear will ultimately reenact until we have the technology to deal with it. There is no nobility in hiding pain, in hiding fear, in hiding shame, in hiding trauma, and saying that we're fine, but living in the exhaustion, in the separation and loneliness, and the grief of being disintegrated from ourselves and modeling that behavior to the next generation.